Hey boo, I'm back in the homeland, Malaysia, with my mom and our partners. I had some time on this trip to have long conversations with my mom about her childhood and her dreams as she matured in a completely different environment, so I wanted to take this opportunity to shine a light on the hardships of immigrants and answer the question, what does it mean to be an immigrant? My mom and dad met through a mutual friend who was dating my dad's brother, and their relationship bloomed fast and furious, which in today's standards would have been called love bombing, but back then it was just considered young, stupid love. My mom had a dream of being a flight attendant so she could travel the world, but the Asian airline she wanted to join had a, let's say, misogynistic outlook on their flight attendants, with the females having to conform their bodies to the uniform and be subservient to their customers. So subservient that they couldn't be in relationships. Sus. My dad convinced my mom to leave behind their friends, sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, and her dream for not even the guarantee of money, but the prospects. The American dream, if you will. And she abided. They got married, worked at their friend's fine dining restaurant in America, and had their first son. They made pretty good money, enough to go back to Malaysia and introduced my oldest brother to the family there. They had enough time to try out different and new experiences like apple picking, going to amusement parks, and just things that families do. My mom and dad were still working towards getting their citizenship at the time and had another friend who needed help with their business endeavor. So they moved to another state, and as they were helping out their other friend, my mom and dad gave birth to their second son. They were busy trying to help this friend getting their citizenship and finding a place to establish their family, so they had less time to spend as a family, less money, no apple picking, not as many outings, and less time in Malaysia. Then a friend said, come to San Antonio. There's cheap land and houses. We can be partners in this restaurant that we want to open, and we'll sponsor some of your family to come too. We can all work together. It was set. My mom and dad took my brothers. They opened the restaurant in San Antonio, got my dad's brother and his kids and my grandma even to come out to San Antonio, help the restaurant, and then I was born. We all lived in the same house for a while. It was very lively, with each room crammed with kids and adults, just high-pitched voices, screaming Cantonese at each other, learning English together, assimilating as well as we could into American culture with sits on Santa's lap, searching for eggs from the Easter Bunny, and wiggling out loose teeth for a visit from the Tooth Fairy. My mom and dad were finally American citizens, and eventually the savings account had grown enough to afford a new house in a more affluent part of town, where my mom and dad would build up their first restaurant. My grandma lived with us since I was the youngest cousin, and she looked after us while my parents drummed up the business. With my grandma around, I would always have a fresh bowl cut and learned of discipline through wire hangers. But when we grew older and another one of my dad's brothers came to America, she moved out, and us kids had a rite of passage to complete. The rite of passage as a first-generation Asian American with a family business. My first job was the empathy delivery girl, where my mom would drive to a customer's house, send me down the walkway to their door, and collect a fatter tip than they would normally give because the 6-year-old was giving them their order, with my mom just waving at them from her car. When I could speak as perfect of English as a 7-year-old could speak was when I started escorting people to their tables. I could still remember when an old man came up to tell me that there are child labor laws, and I replied, "This is a family business, sir." And he gave me a good old chuckle and a $5 bill. Those are some good times. Meanwhile, my brothers were filling in for prep cooks, dishwashers, packing takeout boxes into corresponding bags. The boys took care of the back of the house, while the girls stood in the front, just as our culture instilled. My mom and dad were hyper-focused on the restaurant, making sure operations went smooth daily by being present throughout the lunch and dinner rush, working alongside their employees. Us kids didn't get to see much of our parents on school days, and I think that's why I grew up to be hyper independent. Our house was in the mid to high socioeconomic part of the San Antonio community. There wasn't a lot of other people from our culture around for us to bond with or really to connect to. It was especially difficult for my brothers because they were eccentric and had varying interests, not usually finding common ground with people that we were surrounded by. Yeah, of course, we had some nice adults around us, and we found some friends at first, but most people just stuck around because they knew that we had a restaurant that their parents liked going to. And despite the bullying, the rocks, and jokes being thrown at us, my brothers found their friends. I won't lie, it was a little difficult for me to find my friends because I was weird and excitable and sometimes too straightforward. My parents not being around throughout my childhood had really affected me socially, and I was starved for attention and inclusion and acceptance. That's besides the point, a whole other story. But anyway, my mom and dad were getting a divorce because the business wasn't doing too well, and therefore the relationship wasn't doing so well either. I literally can only remember one time that I ever saw my mom and dad hug and cuddle, like not even a kiss, you know? We stayed in the house with my mom in the restaurant throughout the divorce, and my dad got all the fixer-upper properties, the savings accounts, and the Lexus. It was around this time that I felt really isolated and fell into a depression that just dug me further into being socially awkward. My ability to make friends was limited to online games and budding social forums like MySpace and Pixo and Facebook. As an adult, I can see the issues and point out where my parents could have done better. Sure, yeah, I could hold their neglect and inability to communicate their emotions over their heads. Even hold a grudge against them for really forever if I wanted to. But I can also put myself in their shoes and understand why they did what they chose to do, understand where the decisions were based out of, and come to understand my parents as human beings who didn't really know what they were doing because, well, they were immigrants. They were thrown into a culture that they didn't grow up in. They were subject to an environment where societal norms were different. They didn't understand that discipline could be anything but swift punishment that causes our little butt cheeks and arms to be red and bruised. My mom gave birth to my oldest brother when she was in her early 20s. I'm almost 30 years old. I haven't had my first child yet. And I can't even imagine the amount of stress that would have put me under. As well as giving up my dream to lift up my man's dream up and be subject to serving him because I'm a female. I can't imagine. I do things for my partner because I love him and I show my love through acts of service. But my mom was expected to iron my dad's clothes, pick up after him, and expect him to come home drunk every night because that was the norm. America gave my mom a backbone that normally women in her culture wouldn't dare show to her husband for fear of being reprimanded or being outcast as an undesirable as a divorcee. I think she's still in a cycle where she undervalues herself as a woman, just generally as a human being, but she's still alive and working on her mentality, and I really commend her for the growth that she's shown, even in her young old age of 63. I could focus on the times I felt jealous of my friends whose parents showed up to the orchestra concert with a bundle of fresh flowers, with a gigantic hug and a smile intertwined with the words, "I'm so proud of you, I love you so much." Just wishing that one of my parents would show up to one of my concerts. Or I could remember the times that my mom came home absolutely exhausted from the lunch rush to make a box Betty Crocker cake and a little tub of ice cream and asked if I would make some cake with her after dinner. Or when my dad went to Restaurant Depot and got me a huge jar of maraschino cherries because I told him at the Sonic drive-thru that I really liked the red thing that was on top of the whipped cream. I don't have much perspective on my dad's side of the story because he doesn't speak English very well. Even though my parents' relationship wasn't successful in the end, they're still human. So what does it mean to be an immigrant? Immigrants are still humans, and they are allowed to make mistakes just as they made sacrifices for the life that they have dreams of and are striving towards. Some immigrants have regrets of taking the leap because they didn't end up successful in their endeavors at the life that they imagined. Some are able to look past the mistakes that they've made with the understanding that the adversity is what they learn from to become stronger, better. Immigrants lose pieces of themselves because they need to assimilate to be accepted in many cultures. They have to learn a different language quickly, dress differently, learn customs, and maybe even celebrate holidays that they're unfamiliar with. Another layer that's usually added is raising a family in this new culture. How much should you be teaching your child about your heritage? How are your kids going to be perceived in this community? What customs and traditions should we keep and teach the kids? Immigrants are resilient and find community wherever they can because their support system is too far away. They're jolted away from their culture, their language, their loved ones, for the idea that their future might be brighter in an unfamiliar place. Compassion is the gateway for immigrants to share their story, feel safe in their new community, and actually accepted for who they are. I don't think anyone should be scared to show their culture off or chided for communicating their insecurities or fears. It's those that approach others with kindness and empathy that could really change someone's life for the better. So thank you to those online friends that would log onto the game consistently throughout the week. Thank you to the friend that noticed I would skip lunch and would bring me a sack lunch. Thank you to my mom for all those nights of yelling and crying, working your little booty off, wanting better for yourself and us kids. Thank you to my dad for sacrificing time and your own health to make the dream work and provide for us financially. Thank you to my brothers for staying strong when I was afraid of my own home. And to your friends that introduced me to my love for video games and quality time watching anime. There is compromise and sacrifice when we aren't born in an advantageous situation. And as adults, it's our responsibility to learn from mistakes and adapt so we can live our life without so much worry and pave the way towards success for the generations to come. Thank you for watching and listening to this Malaysian immigrant vlog. If you guys would like to see more travel and lifestyle content, please subscribe for more.